You're standing in your own workplace. You've been there for 3 years. Your boss is 10 feet away, arms crossed, face red. And then you hear the chirp of a police radio coming up the hallway. Your boss just called the cops on you, not because you committed a crime, because you two had an argument. And he decided the fastest way to win was to turn it into a criminal matter. Carch down. In about 30 seconds, an officer is going to walk through that door, hear one side of the story, and decide whether you're leaving in cuffs or walking out on your own terms. What you say in the next 10 seconds will determine which one happens. Now, this scenario I'm walking you through is built from patterns I see over and over in real cases. Not one specific incident, but the legal principles and the exact words that work are universal. And I'm going to show you how to use them. Here's what just happened. You're a warehouse supervisor. Your boss, you said no politely, professionally, and cited the company's own policy manual. He didn't like that, and the argument escalated. He told you to leave the premises. You said you'd finish your shift and leave when it's over, just like any other day. That's when he pulled out his phone and called 911, claiming you were refusing to leave and becoming aggressive. You didn't touch him, you didn't threaten him. You stood your ground on a safety issue. But now, there's a police officer walking in and your boss is already talking. Here's what most people do wrong. They try to argue their case to the cop. They explain the whole backstory, the safety check, the policy manual, the 3 years of employment, the unfair treatment. And while they're doing that, the officer is watching them get emotional, watching them point fingers, watching them look like the aggressor. The boss, meanwhile, is calm because he's already told his version. He's the one who called. He's framing this as trespassing. And in the officer's mind, the person who calls usually isn't the problem. Is this your supervisor? Yes. Did he ask you to leave? Yes. And that's where you lose, because now the officer is thinking. Property owner, authorized representative, refused lawful order to exit. That's textbook trespassing under most state statutes. It doesn't matter that you're an employee. It doesn't matter that your shift isn't over in that moment. The officer isn't interested in your employment contract or your safety concerns. He's interested in whether someone with authority over the property told you to leave and you didn't. Here's the thing most people don't understand. Police are not workplace arbitrators. They are not there to referee your labor dispute. They are there because someone called and claimed a crime is happening. Their job is to resolve the immediate conflict. And the fastest way to do that is to remove the person who's been told to leave. If you argue the merits of why you were right and your boss was wrong, you're not talking about the law the officer is applying. You're talking past him. So let's rewind. The officer walks in. Your boss has already painted you as the problem. The officer turns to you. This is the moment. And here's exactly what you say, officer. I understand there's been a complaint. I'm going to leave voluntarily right now. I'm also an employee here, and I believe I'm being terminated unlawfully. But I'm not going to argue that with you. I'll handle that through the proper legal channels. I'm leaving. That's it. Let's break down why those exact words matter. First, I'm going to leave voluntarily right now. You just eliminated the criminal element. Trespassing requires refusing to leave after being told to do so by someone with authority. The moment you announce you're leaving, you've cured the refusal. You're complying. The officer has no basis to arrest you because the complaint was that you wouldn't leave. And now you are down. Second, I'm also an employee here, and I believe I'm being terminated unlawfully. You've planted a flag. You're not arguing it, you're stating it. You're making clear to the officer and to anyone listening, this isn't a trespassing situation. It's a workplace dispute. You're creating a record fawn. If your boss tries to deny later that he fired you, or tries to claim you quit, you've got a witness, the cop who heard you say you were being terminated. Third, I'm not going to argue that with you. I'll handle that through the proper legal channels. This is critical. You're showing the officer respect. You're acknowledging his role. You're making it clear. You understand he's not a judge, and you're not expecting him to be. That sentence alone drops the temperature in the room by half. Officers escalate when they feel like you're trying to make them pick sides. You just told him you're not doing that. Fourth, I'm leaving. Repeat it. Make it the last thing you say. Because now the officer has nothing to do. His job was to get you to leave. You're leaving. He's not going to arrest someone who's complying. Now let's talk about what happens next, because this is where your boss makes his second mistake. In a lot of these cases, the boss isn't satisfied with you just leaving. He wants you arrested. So he starts embellishing. He threatened me. He was acting erratic. I don't feel safe. And here's where your silence up until this point pays off. Because the officer just watched you stay calm, speak clearly, and immediately comply. If your boss now tries to claim you were threatening the officer's own observations, you've given him no reason to believe you're dangerous. There's a case that's relevant here, and it's not one most people know about. Berkemer v. McCarty, decided by the Supreme Court in 1984. It's mostly cited for Miranda issues, but it establishes something important. Police officers are allowed to make on-scene judgments about whether someone poses a threat or is committing a crime based on their behavior and demeanor during the encounter. If you show up calm, cooperative, and non-threatening, that observation carries weight. If your boss is now claiming the opposite, the officer has to reconcile that with what he just saw. And most of the time, in a workplace dispute where no physical evidence of a crime exists, the officer is going to decline to make an arrest and tell both parties it's a civil matter. But here's the other layer. Employment law. Your boss just terminated you in front of a witness, possibly without cause, possibly in retaliation for refusing an unsafe work order. Depending on your state, that could be wrongful termination. If your workplace is governed by OSHA standards, and most warehouses have protection under the Occupational Safety and Health Act's anti-retaliation provisions, specifically Section 11C, which makes it illegal to fire or discipline an employee for refusing work they reasonably believe is unsafe. You're not arguing that with the cop, but you are going to argue it with an employment attorney and your class. And you're going to argue it with your state's labor board. And the fact that a police officer responded and witnessed your boss's statements is now part of your documentation. When you file your complaint, you'll include the incident report number. You'll include the officer's name. You'll submit a statement about what was said. That police report becomes evidence in your favor because it's going to show that you left voluntarily, that your boss called the police over a workplace dispute, and that no crime occurred. Now let's address the variation where your boss tries to take it further. Let's say the officer asks him, "Do you want to press charges?" And your boss says, "Yes." Here's what you need to know. Trespassing charges require proof that you knowingly remained on the property after being told to leave by someone with lawful authority. If you left immediately when the officer arrived, there's no remaining. The statute in most states, and I'm using California Penal Code Section 602 as the model here, but this applies almost everywhere, requires a refusal to leave after notice. You didn't refuse. You left. The officer can explain that to your boss. And in most cases, that ends it. But let's say you've got an officer who's less experienced, or your boss is particularly insistent, and the officer says, "Well, I can take a report and forward it to the DA." Fine. Let him. Because here's what happens next. The district attorney's office reviews the report and sees that the subject left voluntarily as soon as the officer arrived, that this occurred in the context of an employment dispute, and that the business owner is trying to use the criminal system to resolve a civil matter. That case gets rejected. I've seen this dozens of times, Devs. Prosecutors don't want to waste resources on workplace drama where no actual crime occurred. Here's the mistake people make after leaving. They post about it on social media. They send angry emails. They go back to the property to get their stuff without arranging it properly. Do not do any of that. The moment you leave that, you document everything. You write down what was said, who was present what time the officer arrived, what you said, what your boss said. You request a copy of the police report. You're entitled to it. You take that documentation to an employment attorney. If you're in a union, you contact your union rep immediately. You also file for unemployment. Your boss might contest it and claim you were fired for cause majeure. But refusing to follow an order I believed was unsafe is not misconduct. In most states, it's protected. You'll win that hearing, especially if you've got the police report and your own written. One more thing. If your boss tries to claim you quit, you've got a witness who heard you say you were being terminated. That's huge. Employers do this all the time to avoid unemployment claims. They'll write in their records that you abandoned your job, but you've got a police report with an officer's notes that you identified yourself as an employee being terminated. That's evidence. Now there's a scenario I want to address where this goes differently. Let's say you don't stay calm. Let's say when the officer arrives, you're angry. You're pointing at your boss. You're raising your voice. You're refusing to leave because I have a right to be here. I work here. Now the officer is dealing with someone who's agitated and non-compliant. Your boss is calm. You argue. Now he's giving you a lawful order. And if you refuse that, you're not just facing trespassing, you're facing obstruction, resisting, possibly disorderly conduct, depending on how loud you get. All of that was avoidable. The law didn't change, your behavior did. This is why the exact words matter. I'm going to leave voluntarily right now is a complete sentence. It doesn't need a justification attached. It doesn't need an argument attached. You're not surrendering your rights by saying it. You're preserving them because the alternative is getting arrested, spending the night in jail, posting bail mail, hiring a criminal defense attorney, and fighting a trespassing charge that could have been avoided entirely by just walking out and handling it the right way. Here's the broader principle. When police show up, they're responding to a complaint. The complaint frames the encounter. If the complaint is, this person won't leave, and you immediately leave, the complaint is resolved. The officer has no further role. If you try to turn it into a debate, you're expanding the encounter into something the officer now has to manage. And the way officers manage conflicts is by removing people, issuing citations, or making arrests. You don't want any of that. You want to shrink the encounter down to nothing by eliminating the reason it exists. Your boss wanted to use the police to intimidate you into submission or to have you arrested so he could tell the staff. You were fired for cause. You didn't give him that. You left, you documented it, and now you're handling it the legal way through an employment claim, not a criminal case. That's the decision you make in 10 seconds. Stay and argue, or leave and win later. One more thing before we go. If you think your boss calling the cops was bad, wait until you see what happens when officers themselves, because the next case I'm going to walk you through involves a driver who got arrested for something that wasn't even illegal. And the whole thing fell apart because of one question he asked that the officer couldn't answer.